This is Congruentry. Congruentry has two sections here that are independent. So there's two sets of interactions with a run process button for each. So this on the left hand side down the bottom, you can see there's a run process button and another run process button. We'll go to the bottom one first because that's the simplest, and that's simply to compare two specific files. So this is just to test that two files are the same, congruent. So the congruentry name is kind of made up from the idea of things being congruent or not. And let's see, single, don't think I have a single file on here. Alpha A. Now you can copy and clip locations here, and then when you actually, this gets a little bit tricky. If I want to browse to the same folder A, I can cut that back, click browse, goes to folder A. Alright, so there I have the same file, alpha.txt, in both folder A and folder B, and I want to test whether those are identical or not, and I can then just click on run process and it will do that. So that's just comparing two files. There's no options here because by default we're testing byte for byte of those two files. So there is actually a box for stringent there. I've disabled that. At the moment it only tests that they are byte for byte compatible. The main purpose for Congruentry though is for comparing paths of files where there's lots of files in lots of folders. So that's in the top section here. So you may notice we've got two colors. We've got two shades. There's a green shade and a blue shade. Those are for our two distinct paths. We have a browse button to go find the path that we want to compare. So let's go into the ones I've set up for this. Folder A. Now I can get to folder B, which is next to folder A in there. I can cheat a little by getting that path from the clipboard, pasting it in, going browse, and it jumps to that spot. Select folder B. There's folder B now. I'm going to ignore the small settings in each of those for the moment, and let's go through the steps here. Okay, now when we go testing these for being the same, how should we do that? Major thing is here, should we test stringent? Stringent means every file in those two folders will not just be checked for looking like they're the same, they'll be checked whether they're exactly the same, which is byte for byte comparison. So stringent is that setting, and that would test for that. You may wonder, why would you not do that? Well, you might, depending on how large a thing you're comparing for and what your purpose is, you might like to quickly check whether there are any files different between the two, because that will just mean reading the directories of those two folders and what's in all of them, and that should be quite fast. But if you want to do this so that you can go deciding, well, I could delete folder B because it's proven to be the same as folder A, then that's when you actually turn on stringent and say, alright, I'm prepared to let that take some time because it will test that every file is all the files are the same files, and also that every file is exactly the same. Because we're testing structures, we've got some different ideas about when should we stop testing the structure. So we could stop as soon as there's any difference between the two folders, and that might seem the very obvious thing to do, but actually there are some subtleties about what you might do with this comparing the two paths. If you just want to know that every file in folder A is also there and exactly the same and in the exact same place inside folder B, but there could now be some additional files in folder B, but you don't care about that. You're just trying to prove that all of folder A is there intact in folder B, then you don't want to stop as soon as there's some difference between folder A and B. So the term for when one is not a full subset of the other, the term I've used here is moiety. That's a word you can look up in the dictionary. So the default setting here is, stop when there's a difference that means that one of those is not the same inside the other folder. I'm not requiring you to say which A and B in terms of which folder is the one that might be the one inside the other, because I want the whole program to be symmetric here. But you can say, when it's no longer the case that one is the subset of the other, then stop, because frankly you probably then don't care. You still can turn that off, and the reason for turning that off would be you'd like to get a report of what all the differences are. Now I do have to stress, this program was not written to find the differences. It's written to prove the things are the same, really. It's why it's called Congruentry. But if you turn all of that off, you will get a report of all the differences. You could choose in terms of what gets generated as a report file. Does it report all of the differences? You'll note that that's not on by default. Or should it just report a summary of the differences? So again, that's partly because this program is not aimed at being a tell me all of the differences program. I suspect there would be some other options that you would like for a program to do that. They may be added eventually. At the moment, that's not the focus. However, what we can also do is, in finding the things that are different, we can have the program generate a script of copies that would make them the same. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that this still only works from the moiety idea of making them the same. So if we were talking about all the files in folder A being in folder B, even though B might be allowed to have more files, generate a copy script would work out that A was a subset of B, and that certainly there were files in B that are not in A, and in generating a copy script, but it found, for example, that some of the files in folder A were not in folder B, it would generate a copy script just for files going from A into B, so that they would become the same. Most of the time when you would run Congruentry, it's because for some independent reason you would just want to test that things are the same. Now we do have the issue of you may be wanting to do this when the file systems are different on A and B. And in particular, this is something that will probably happen quite a bit. If you're someone who uses a system like Linux and you have drives that you want to compare that are Windows formatted drives. And there are differences between file systems. And so Foldatry and Congruentry in this part is designed to be aware of some of that. You can see that by default the architect settings here have both been set to Linux. But you can tell it that there are some other things going on. It could be that I had copied files from A to B, but the B thing was an NTFS drive, for example, which would be a modern Windows formatted drive. So you can tell it that, and in which case it will take account of some things. And actually when we selected that box, then you may have noticed the archetype specifics below changed. Up in the top one, and when it was set for Linux, the archetype specifics was encoding none, case sensitive, because Linux file systems are case sensitive for names, uppercase and lowercase. You can have what looks like the same file name, but different uppercase and lowercase. They are different file names in the Linux file systems, generally. However, most Windows systems, and particularly going back in time, but even modern Windows, file names cannot be the same, but with different case, upper and lower case. That's a clash, and Windows will not allow that. So, and basically that's because it's its own file systems. NTFS, for example, also requires that files not be the same but different in case. So, as you can see here, we've selected modern Windows in path B, and part of the specifics that matches is not case sensitive. And in fact there are 4 things that have gone on here. It's said when we go looking at the encoding, which is a complicated matter to discuss, but leave that for the moment. It's gone UTF-8 would be the assumed encoding there. Not case sensitive file names. you may or may not know, Microsoft, there's various characters that are not allowed in file names in Microsoft's filing systems, and there are also some names that are not allowed for files in Microsoft's filing system. If you don't know what those are, you'll probably be better off looking over at the documentation, which gives those in detail, but these are specific things to know about that. So an example of this could be that you have a file in folder A which is mixed lowercase and uppercase, but for some reason the copy of it that's in folder B is in all uppercase. I'm making that up, but so the idea would be Congruentry here would actually test for that and be able to detect that yes, it's there. The name's slightly different in the Windows one, because in the Windows one it could be uppercase or lowercase or any mix in a way that doesn't matter, but you don't want to be thrown by that. Now, there are various settings for these boxes. That was the modern Windows. Early Windows, different in character encoding here. Other than that, the other settings are the same. I'm not going to go into that in detail. If we go back to earlier DOS, MS-DOS and PC-DOS, different encoding for the characters yet again. The other settings are also the same for all Windows things. And finally, custom lets you do something else. In fact, let's now look at what custom does. Custom. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's because I said... Oh, there we go. When you choose custom, what actually shows up then is in fact those four settings that the display was telling us about. So now we can actually choose them manually. We can choose the encoding, and for the moment what you see there is the three encodings that were showing up along with ASCII, whether to be case sensitive or not, whether to deal with the different aspects of Microsoft's filing systems. Are there the forbidden names? Are there the characters that you're not allowed to use in Microsoft file names? And another one that I'm not going to explain. Old hands will know that you used to be restricted to 8 letters, not 3 letters for names, and there's an issue about how long names would get converted to those, and the program is capable of dealing with those. Finally, depending on the path that you set, there's an experimental thing for detecting what is the appropriate archetype. When you do detect, it doesn't particularly change the archetype, but it does tell you what it found, saying here it thinks path A is ext4 and UTF-8, which actually would match the link setting if I was to set that. When you've done all of the settings, you simply click Run Process and away it will go.